Okay, so welcome everybody to the Israelis and Palestinians for Peace weekly Zoom meeting. This is a meeting that we have every week for the past, I believe, 50 weeks. So almost a month now, a full year now, that we are having this every week, almost every time in the same time. Sometimes we move it to a different date because of holiday or such. But for the most part, Wednesday, 9 p.m. Jerusalem time, this is when we do that. And we have two formats. One format is just open discussion between Israelis and Palestinians and others that are interested in the topic. And the other one is when we have a special guest to educate ourselves. Tonight, as a matter of fact, we have the main guest is Nadav Tamir, which is the executive director of J Street Israel, and we would love to hear about him. And I know that he has a very impressive resume when it comes to peace and other politics or political activities. But we also want to learn about J Street, the general organization, and J Street Israel as well. And we also have a special guest here that came by, and this is Dr. Ziad Darwish, who is from the Committee for Interaction with the Israeli Society at Fatah, and it will be interesting to hear his perspective as well. So with that, I would like to open the floor for Nadav to introduce himself and his organization. And after, maybe 5-10 minutes, we will follow up with the questions. Hi, Nadav.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for doing this and for not giving up on the efforts for peace. So I used to be a diplomat for many years. I actually finished the cadet course of the Foreign Ministry and was sent to the office of the foreign minister at the time, Shimon Peres. It was the days after the Oslo Accords and when everything was very promising, and I felt that I'm part of history. But later on, it changed. After the Rabin assassination, Peres went to be prime minister. I remained in the foreign minister's office, and I was there with Ehud Barak, who was foreign minister for a while, and then when my friends from the course started to go to different countries around the world, I was obsessed that I wanted to go to Washington, D.C., but it's very hard to get to Washington, D.C. in your first post abroad. So I said I'll remain in the foreign minister's office until there is an opportunity. And when the opportunity came, I did go to Washington, and I spent 4 years in our embassy there. When I came back, 1 month before 9/11, Peres was again foreign minister, so I had another chance to work with him. But then Labor left government, and I went to the Kennedy School of Government to do my master's in public administration. Came back to Israel, worked with the Director General of the ministry for a while, and then was appointed Consul General of Israel to New England and served in Boston between 2006 and 2010, and when I finished my term there, I came back to Israel and later became the deputy advisor of President Peres in the last 3 years of his presidency. And when he finished his presidency and I reached the conclusion that I can't be an obedient civil servant in governments that don't represent my values, I left the foreign ministry and joined him at the Peres Center for Peace and Innovation. But because the Peres Center for Peace and Innovation is not dealing with policy or politics, it's more a people-to-people capacity-building organization, I was looking for other ways to deal with my passion about policy and the political piece. So I was involved with the Geneva Initiative. I'm on the steering committee and the Mitvim think tank for regional diplomacy. And I was also in touch with J Street all those years. I'll get back to that when I'll explain more about J Street. And a little more than a year ago, I was asked by J Street to become part of the team and to head the Israeli office. And since then, I'm doing both. I'm the executive director of J Street in Israel, but I'm still also involved with the Peres Center and with Mitvim and Geneva. You know, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is indeed my biggest passion. So actually, J Street was created when I was Consul General in Boston. And when I was introduced to J Street, back then I was very excited because I felt during my years as a diplomat in the US that, you know, this kind of pro-Israel organizations, and I'm saying pro-Israel with the, you know, with a disclaimer, because there is a big argument about what does it mean to be pro-Israel. But during the years, I felt that they are actually taking Israel further from the way I thought, or from the vision that I thought Israel should pursue. And I also felt that there is a big disconnect between most of the Jews in America who tend to be more liberal, progressive, and the organized, you know, the mainstream organizations who took the position that they support the Israeli government no matter what. So when the Israeli governments became right-wing, they were right-wing and there was no problem for them. But it made them, you know, there was a big rift between them and the grassroots of the Jewish community. So when I heard of J Street, I was really excited that there is an organization that gives Jews the possibility to be both pro-Israel and pro-peace. That means that to be pro-Israel doesn't mean to be anti-Palestinian, and you could be pro both Israel and Palestine, and that you could support Israel while criticizing its government at the same time, and be pro-Israel while still maintaining your values as progressive liberal Jews. I thought it was a miracle that this organization was created, because I felt that if we will keep on with the two options of either saying Israel is always right or Israel is always wrong, we will lose our ability to really influence the situation for the future of this region. And I also saw how in the American Congress, because of the so-called pro-Israeli organization, it became politically suicidal for members of Congress to speak about a Palestinian state and to speak about Palestinian human rights and to speak about the occupation. So J Street was creating that space that enabled that conversation to be much more richer and connected to reality. And that's why I kept on supporting J Street, even though my government was very reluctant and thought that any support for J Street is making AIPAC weaker, and they thought AIPAC is a very important part of Israel's national security, which I completely disagree with, and I think it's becoming more and more evident that they're not. So J Street, as I said, is the political home of the pro-Israel, pro-peace Jews in America, but it's not just an advocacy organization, it's a real political organization that support candidates. We have a committee that interview candidates for Congress, and if their views are aligned with us, we support them financially. We have a PAC that raised money. We also activate our supporters and leaders whenever there is a resolution in Capitol Hill that is aligned with our values. We are in touch with the administration. Of course, that wasn't the case during the Trump years, but with the Biden administration, we do have connections. The same is also true with the Israeli government, that today we became much more fragile, but during Netanyahu, J Street didn't really have any connection with the Israeli government, but now we have some friends in the government, so we have more connections. The Israeli office role is to help the work, which is mostly in America and mostly intended to influence American politics and American foreign policy. My role in Israel is to be the eyes and ears of J Street on the ground, to kind of interpret what's happening here to educate, to bring speakers to our audiences, both Israelis and Palestinians, to host delegations of members of Congress or staffers or politicians, leaders who come to Israel, Palestine, and to show them the complexity on the ground. And also to bring what we call validators. Validators are Israelis or Palestinians that could bring their kind of views and gravitas as experts on the ground to support things that we do. One of them, for example, is not connected to Israel-Palestine, but that's on the Iranian issue where J Street was helping Obama to get support for the JCPOA, the agreement between the P5+1 and Iran. And now if the agreement will be, if there will be a re-enter to the agreement, we will try to do the same to help the Biden administration. So validators are Israelis with a security gravitas who could speak about it. Why is it good for Israel? This is an example. Of course, we have other examples, let's say people who understand in human rights and can explain what's happening in Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah, or in Area C and stuff like that. So this is basically what the Israeli office is doing. We're very small in Israel, but the organization in America is growing and becoming stronger. When I was introduced to J Street, it was a startup. I didn't really believe that they could compete, but I think today J Street represent the center of the both Jewish community and the Democratic Party. Of course, we have people to our right and to our left, both in the Jewish community and in the Democratic Party, but I think that our views represent the majority. Of course, we're not as big and strong as our competitors because we're pretty new and our budget is I think, maybe a tenth of the budget of AIPAC, but we're growing and we're becoming more and more influential. The last delegation of members of Congress that we hosted in Israel included 10 members of Congress, and it was amazing to see how they came back from that delegation with a lot of energy to push this issue higher on the priority list of the American administration. So this is basically about me and about J Street, and I'll be happy to address your questions.
Thank you so much, Nadav. So people are welcome to raise your virtual hand if you want to ask questions. In the meantime, I would like to ask you a couple of questions. One is just technical. How many people in J Street, members?
Well, as members who actually, pay and are active members, we have around almost 200,000. But as I said, I think in terms of the views, when you look at the opinion polls, I think we do represent the majority of Jews in America.
Wow, 200,000 paying members. This is really fantastic. Again, I understand it's not as impressive as AIPAC, but if you compare it to all the peace organizations here in Israel, I don't think we reach this number, maybe close to this number. So it's really impressive. Second, I wanted to ask you, I believe that we are dependent on the US to a large degree on making peace here, unfortunately. I view the Israelis as a bully who doesn't want to give up the toy that is called West Bank, and we need somebody from outside to help us with that. And I think that the US is the one that could do that very effectively. The question is, do you see that happening sometime? Probably not in the near future, but in some more distant future. Do you see feasibility for that, that the US would actually intervene as they did to a certain degree in Obama's day? and will, bring people into the negotiation table, and also not just bring them into the table, but actually, try to put leverage to change, to make sure that indeed the concessions are made.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be in my position if I was not optimistic that it is possible and that we can make a difference. I'm a student of Shimon Peres, and I learned from him that optimists and pessimists die the same way, but they live very differently. And because no one really knows what's going to happen in the future, optimism is just more constructive. Because optimists tend to see opportunities and not just obstacles, and that when good things are happening. And I want to remind all of you that nobody believed that peace is possible before, Sadat came to Jerusalem, and nobody believed that peace is possible in Northern Ireland before the Friday Accord. So the fact that most people now are desperate and there is a lot of skepticism doesn't make me skeptic. I'm a big optimist. I believe that as an Israeli, I don't want to leave the work only to the US. I do believe that we also have our own work to do. And I actually think that there is a big mismatch between the fact that the plurality of Israelis support the two-state solution, but also the same majority don't believe that it is possible. And the fact that they don't believe that it is possible is because nobody is articulating that vision for a long time. But I want to remind all of you that, when Begin, the hawk of all hawks, decided to move out of Sinai and dismantle the settlements, most Israelis supported him. And when Ariel Sharon, the hawk of all hawks, decided to move it out of Gaza, most Israelis supported him. And when Olmert, who came from the real right wing, was prime minister, he really tried to achieve an agreement with Abbas. And if he was not indicted, I think he might have achieved it. So I don't believe in the desperation and the fact that many of my liberal friends are in denial, which for me is like kind of enjoying the jacuzzi on the Titanic, is not a reason to give up. But I agree with you that American leadership is very important, especially when we have a government in Israel that even this government that is much, much better than we had before is still not capable of doing anything serious about peace process. We have a serious problem of legitimacy to the Palestinian leadership that was not elected for a long time, and there's corruption and some dictatorial tendencies. So no doubt that American leadership is very important. I was in quite a lot of meetings with President Obama, and I know that he was a friend of Israel and friend of peace. The problem, he was not very good in demonstrating it to Israelis for many reasons. I think Biden is much more capable of giving Israel what we really need as Israelis, which is a kind of a combination between embrace and push. When you only push us, we call you anti-Semite, we ignore you. When you only embrace us, we take you for granted. But if you can do both, you could be pretty effective. And I think that last May, when we had the violence, it took a lot of time for Biden to intervene. And a lot of the reason for his intervention was J Street work on the Hill to push Democrats, to push the administration to do something about the violence on the ground. But when he did intervene, he was able to get a ceasefire in 11 days, unlike the 51 days in the round before, which shows you that if the Biden administration decide to put it as a priority, I think they could achieve a lot. Unfortunately, it is not a priority. As we all know, they had the big 3 C's, COVID, China, climate change. They had some very, big projects or reforms to pass domestically, which was a big effort for the administration with a very small majority that they have in the 2 chambers in Capitol Hill. And now they have the Ukraine and Russia and NATO. And the only priority for them in the Middle East was to re-enter the Iran deal, but definitely not the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. For a long time, they didn't have an ambassador here, and their presence was completely not felt. It is a little better now. I do see much more activity from Ambassador Knight and from Blinken, and from when number 3 in the State Department, Victoria Nuland, was here. She dealt with some of the issues like settler violence and things like that. We saw that some of the projects of this government that were announced, like E1 and Atarot and others, were postponed because of American pressure. So it's a little better, but it's far from being enough, because in order to really do something about ending the occupation and bringing peace, you need more than just preventing the bad things from happening. You need to create a political horizon. And I do believe that America can and should create a political horizon. I actually think that the regional environment is much, much more ripe for political horizon. It's true that the Abrahamic Accords were created for the wrong reasons, but actually they could be used and leveraged to influence on the Palestinian issue if they will be orchestrated with smart diplomacy by the Biden administration. When the Arab Initiative was presented in 2002, and I think most Israelis ignored it, and for me it's a big mistake, similar to the Palestinian mistake when the UN decided for partition. But because they thought that it's not concrete and normalization with the Arab world is not a real thing. But now that so many Israelis are flying to Dubai and over the Saudi airspace, and right-wing Israelis all of a sudden find out Arabs that they like, that that's a huge incentive that could be used. And I think that for America and for the American role in the world, the two-state solution is one thing that the whole international community could agree on, except for the governments of Israel and Iran, maybe. And this is the one thing where they could agree with China and Russia and with the regional players. So I think it is in the interest of the US to do so. Unfortunately, we don't see it right now, but we're pushing, and we have a much more a Democratic Party that is much closer to where we are than in the past. In the past, it was usually the White House who wanted to do amazing things in the peace process, and Congress was stopping. Now we have the reverse. So once the Biden administration will decide to prioritize it, I think good things can happen. People tell me that, they're going to become lame duck after the midterms elections, because the polls are showing that they're probably going to lose their majority. But actually we saw in the past that when American administrations became lame duck domestically, they turned into foreign policy, because in foreign policy, you don't need Congress as much as you need it for domestic issues. And I believe that Carter helped us with the peace with Egypt when he was lame duck domestically. So I actually think that we should keep on pushing, and hopefully at some point the Biden administration will make the difference and help create a political horizon here. For me, the first thing that the Biden administration should do, the international community should do, is to recognize a Palestinian state and to kind of balance the playing field, that it will be negotiation between more equal sides. And I think also there should be some pressure for elections in Palestine, because right now everybody could say that the Palestinian leadership is not representative and there are two entities in Palestine, but the international community could actually make that change and make sure that there is legitimacy also on the Palestinian side. So I do believe that it is possible, and this is what I'm trying to push in my role in J Street.
Thank you so much, Nadav. Sophie.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Shalom, Nadav. And hi, everyone. So my question is really try to look now historically, if you can, to dissect. Is there, based on all your knowledge, experience, at some point, can you put a finger on certain events, a certain period of time where, since Oslo agreements and up till nowadays, if we can, well, nowadays it's the outcome of some of these issues, but can you point out on certain policies that Israel instituted and did it wrong, and if it was done differently and right, it could have had a much more beneficial, situation nowadays for us doing peace. That's my question, and I can hint towards what has been done with settlements, what has been done in terms of emboldenments of settlers, and where we are now, and also the role of IDF and how it's viewed, because what we know now, and you wrote about it, Nadav, in your letters in J Street, how it all plays out nowadays, where Tzava, right, IDF looks away, and settlers celebrating, and it's just horrible. And how we came to this situation, how did we arrive to this situation, what was done wrong, and how now do you see it still optimistically, how Israeli society, after it has been corrupted by this occupation, how we can get out of it, really. I mean, I try to, if possible, now to bring to some more sincere discussion rather than, talking points and being optimistic, but there are, the reality is too tough to see Israelis behave this way, and total impunity, total disaster. It's a disaster, morally disaster in any regard. So what do we do? What do we do? What did we do wrong? And how the situation can be stopped?
Thank you, Sophie.
That's...
Yeah, so you are asking what did we do wrong and what should we do now? Of course, that's a big question. And if I had all the answers, I would probably be, I don't know, prime minister or something. But first of all, we did a lot wrong. Some smart people said after the 6 Days Wars, like Yeshayahu Leibovich and others, that we have to give back the land and avoid occupation, which is going to be very bad for Israel. And I agree. I think there is no single existential threat on Israel than the occupation. Much more than Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas. I think the occupation is the biggest threat for the future of Israel. So it's not just a thing that the Palestinians are suffering. I believe that it is very, very bad for us.
Well, why do you say that? I mean, I know it's wrong, but why is it a threat, such a threat to Israel? I mean, most Israelis feel pretty secured in the situation.
Well, most people, when you speak about existence and security, they think about military concepts, but I think military is not the issue. I mean, Israel is much, much stronger militarily than all of our neighbors together. What's really the threat for Israel is for our identity, because eventually, if we won't help the Palestinians to have their own state, we will have to choose between being the 23rd Arab country in the world or to be an apartheid state. And in both cases, for me, it's the end of Zionism. So both for moral and strategic reasons, I think the occupation is the biggest danger for Israel. And I know pretty much also about the other issues, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas. It's not that I'm kind of, I was a diplomat, I was an officer. I'm not just a lefty advocate. And in terms of, I think that we're talking about true traumatized people, the Israelis and Palestinians. And unfortunately, on our side, at least, there were too many leaders who manipulated the trauma and the fear from the past to convince Israelis that we are still weakling, even though we are a regional superpower, and that we have, in order to survive, we have to be stronger. While we're so much stronger, and the answers are much more in diplomacy and in compromise. And I believe that also, during Oslo, there were mistakes. I think that kind of letting the settlement kind of postpone it to the final status stage of the negotiation was a big mistake, because it gave a great opportunity for the spoilers to make sure that the 5 years that the Oslo Accord was supposed to take will take so much more, and that eventually to try to block the two-state solution option. I believe that we made a huge mistake by ignoring the change in the regional situation, from the 3 no's of Khartoum after 1967 to the Arab Initiative in 2002, where the Arab world pretty much told us, just solve this problem with the Palestinians and you will become part of the Middle East. And they're not talking about 48 borders, they're talking about 67 borders with land swaps. They're talking even on the refugee issue, which most Israelis believe that the Palestinians are trying to eventually end Israel with the refugees. The Arab Initiative is saying just an agreed meaning Israel has a veto. It's not going to be forced on Israel. And during the Olmert-Abbas negotiation, they were formalized to solve the refugee issue. It's not a pipe dream. I think that there are solutions to all those issues. In many ways, we usually say that we need a light at the end of the tunnel. In the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I believe that we have the light. We're looking for the tunnel. The light is very much somewhere around the Geneva Initiative agreements. Eventually, that's how it's going to look like. It's going to be 67 plus land swaps in equal size, which will allow for around 80% of the settlers who live close to the Green Line to remain in their homes, while compensating the Palestinians in other areas. And the other 20% of the settlers, many of them are not ideological settlers. In Ariel, I think most of the settlers are not ideological. They went there because it was cheaper than get an apartment in Tel Aviv, and they will go back with compensation. And then we will be able to decide whether we take them out by force like we did in Gaza, or we let them stay there, just like we have 21% of Israelis who are Palestinians. They could stay and accept the rules of the Palestinian state, or we could have the confederation model, but it is resolvable. It's clear for me that there should be a capital in East Jerusalem, and that we, for the Palestinians, and we should have a special arrangements in the Holy Basin, because it's very hard to separate those quarters. But we could have a special arrangement of joint kind of sovereignty over the Holy Basin and the Old City. I believe that the George Allen formula, George Allen was the general that Secretary Kerry brought in order to prepare a security plan during the Kerry efforts. And I believe that that plan is very much doable in order to deal with the security issues. So I believe that we have the answers for all of the problems. The problem is to get the political will. The political will is not there, even though, as I said, plurality of Israelis support the two-state solution, but they don't believe it's possible. And many Palestinians lost hope in the two-state solution, both because they don't think Israelis will ever give up, and also because they lost belief in democracy in their own state. And that's why I do believe that the international community should recognize Palestine, but also push for elections. So we did many mistakes, but I believe that the solutions are there, and that desperation is not a strategy. and just like we saw in, when we had the peace with Egypt, people were skeptic before it, and eventually it happened and it was supported by the public. I think the public will support a leader that will lead in that direction. If Begin was able to do it, if Sharon was able to move out of Gaza, I think that Lapid or whoever will be could do it. But I do believe the international community could be helpful, and this is one of the roles of J Street.
Thank you, Nadav. Great answer. I have quite a few questions about it, but there are other people ahead of me here. So, Karen, please.
Hi, yes. I had a question, kind of related. You had mentioned the Federation, and so Americans for Peace Now, they recently hosted a webinar, and they made the following statement in their introduction for the webinar. Americans for Peace Now is committed to a two-state peace agreement, but that could take various forms. One of them is a confederation. So my question to you is, do you think it could be possible for J Street to officially come out like on the record in support of a two-state confederation as an acceptable solution for ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and bringing a genuine, lasting peace?
J Street also, in our last conference, we gave the floor for Yossi Beilin and Hiba Husseini and Sam Bechor and Meron Ben-Benisti and others to speak about this option. I have to say that me personally, I'm a little torn. Because on the one hand, I do understand why confederation could be very attractive, because you don't have to deal with moving forcefully all those settlers. On the other hand, I also think that the settlers that will remain are those who want to spoil the agreement, and I'm afraid that giving it legitimacy might. But just the fact that confederation makes the two-state solution more feasible for some people, that's an advantage, even if eventually it will not be a confederation. Just the fact that it gives people something new. But for me, confederation cannot be instead of a two-state solution. It could be only a way to kind of implement two-state solution. But I'm torn. I have good friends on both sides. Yossi Beilin is someone I admire, but I have other people that are strongly against it and believe that it will give the settlers the ability to really manipulate this confederation. I don't know. I'm not sure about it, but I do know that the two-state solution is possible, and I don't think we have to make the decision whether it's a confederation or not right now. We can make it further on the road, and I believe that the first thing that we need is to be able to kind of give international legitimacy to a Palestinian state, so the negotiations will be more equal and balanced.
Thank you very much, Nadav. Now, Moshe, excuse me for not following the order here, but
okay.
Again, we have another special guest here tonight, which is Dr. Ziad Darwish, and he's basically representing the PA and the Fatah, and to a certain degree, again. And I would like to stay on the topic of confederation for a little bit, because I just spent 2 Zoom meetings this week with Eretz Lekulam, a land for all, and this is a hot topic, and they're getting some momentum, and I really don't know what is the official stand of the Palestinian Authority regarding the confederation idea, and specifically Eretz Lekulam. There are a few confederations idea. Joseph is waiting online here to talk about his confederation idea. So Ziad, can you basically talk about your personal and what you view as the PA approach towards confederation.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I think I have a lot of friends around here, starting from Nadav and Moshe Chertov and the rest. Well, it's very interesting. I heard Nadav, and I know Nadav personally, and of course his organization, the Street, as well. But I think that the main solution for the conflict is establishing a Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel. And of course, talking about confederation, I mean, confederation can be made only between two independent states. So first of all, let's have the independence, okay, establishing the Palestinian state. And afterwards, well, everything is opened. I think that we as Palestinians, economically, we are related so much tightened to the economy of Israel. So that will be a kind of good relation between the two countries. Of course, there is a lot of obstacles that could jeopardize the establishing of such state. But I think that yes, we can push forward for it, especially the American administrations that Nadav talked about, that we are not in a priority of dealing with this conflict. But that leads me to ask Nadav, what J Street do really, since that you have 200,000 members, as you mentioned. How can you push forward with the American administrations really to look forward and start as an American administration, as we witnessed before, that they can involve deeply and try to solve the conflict? Thank you.
Thank you, Ziad.
It's good to see you, Ziad, and yeah, you have so much experience on this file, and I have a lot of respect for you and for what you do. We are trying to, we have open lines with the administration, and we feel that many of our friends in the administration understand exactly why we say what we say and agree with us, but they are still not empowered by the administration politically to do the right thing. And I actually think that the right thing is not as expensive and hard to do as they think. I'm not talking about boots on the ground. I completely understand why America doesn't want to have boots on the ground in the Middle East. I'm just talking about empowering diplomats to do their job, and it is possible. And I expect an American administration to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And in that sense, I'm disappointed. But we do have some leverage through Congress. And I saw on several issues how this leverage was really translated. Recently, we worked with Peace Now and others on a letter of 50 members of Congress about the demolitions in El Walaje, which was helpful. I think after our congressional delegation, we had a letter of members of Congress about E1, which was helpful. I believe that, as I said, the push of members of Congress is what led Biden to intervene in May and to send Blinken for the first time into the region and to have the first phone call with Abbas. It all happened because of the push that we did. Of course, I wish we could achieve more. We have a legislation now on the Hill called the Two-State Solution Act that was introduced by a member of Congress, Andy Levin. that we're trying to get support. We don't believe that it will become a law, but it is part of our constant effort to make the conversation about the occupation and about what needs to be done more acceptable in Congress after so many years where you couldn't say a word about it. And it was radioactive and politically suicidal to speak about this. So it's not, we don't have the silver bullet yet, but I believe that the work that we do is effective. And I wish we had more results, but I hope we will have more results in the future.
Thank you. Moshe, you're next.
Thank you. Ziad, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for joining us. Nadav, back in 2016 in American elections, there was an attempt to get the word occupation into the Democratic National Platform for the national elections. And AIPAC blew it out of the water. They said, anybody who dares touch that term, you're finished. You won't be elected. 4 years later, a group of us from the Meretz Party in Israel, who also vote in the United States, got together with Ben Schneider. I imagine you're familiar with Ben Schneider, used to be the political chief at one time of J Street. And we together wrote a letter to the DNC to ask them to make a very clear statement against any possible annexation. That was the big buzzword back in the Biden elections. And we said, as long as you still have ink in your pen, please add something also about the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination. And we thought that our chances would be more or less the same as they were in 2016. But it turns out that possibly with the help of Ben and his wording, or I don't know exactly what the reasons were, I think there also has been progress in the Democratic Party that led them to approve it. So we actually did get in one full paragraph about annexation and another full paragraph about the Democratic Party supporting the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination. Now, when I published that on Facebook, a man contacted me and he said, Moshe, we have to start a peace symposium. And this is what I've been working on ever since with this gentleman. Yesterday or today was the 12th anniversary of Obamacare. And the person who I'm working with, my co-founder, is the person who wrote the bill. He wrote Obamacare. He is a legislative assistant back then to the leading Black progressive congressman in the United States. And he actually wrote the bill. And this is his profession. He writes bills, he writes resolutions. So we've been working on this together. And what happened was that we were both convinced that there is this window of opportunity that, as you also spoke about earlier, may be closing on us with the midterm elections. We don't know. There is a likelihood of that. Just to be clear to Hamza and anybody else, our goal is not to get the Americans to support any one direction or propose what we or the Palestinians should be doing, but rather only to get the Americans to use their leverage in encouraging the Biden administration to get our leaders back to the negotiating table and into the room. So one of the tools that we're going to be using is we've already written a resolution that we will be presenting to Congress. It hasn't been published yet because we're still finalizing the resolution. I might be presenting it in June when I come to the United States. I'm not quite sure. But my question is, do you see the ability of J Street to actually get behind a resolution that would be signed by dozens of Israeli Palestinian peace organizations, not one or the other, but people who are active in both? And we are asking Congress to push Biden and his whole administration to support such a move of getting our leaders to sit together. Can you see J Street supporting something like that, being active in it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the decisions are being made by the board, and you know, there is the leadership in Washington. I'm a small part of the organization, but I believe that it is. By the way, we don't believe that that just going back to negotiations is enough in the current situation. For example, I do believe that before we go back to negotiations, we need some parameters. So we won't start from scratch each time. We will have some kind of criteria, because every time we go back and every time we start and nothing happens, and it's only getting people less and less believers in peace. So we have to start in a smarter way. But I do believe that J Street could support that. You mentioned how AIPAC was destructive in the old days. You know, what's happening now with AIPAC, I don't know if people are aware of it, but it's pretty amazing. They shot themselves in the foot dramatically because they decided to endorse, you know, just based on you know, members of Congress who support Israel. And they are supporting some Trumpists, some people who are didn't accept the
election results,
the last elections, which turned against them. Many people in the Jewish community who were more on the side of AIPAC, and even their claim that it's a one issue is not true, because, for example, Liz Cheney was not endorsed, and Liz Cheney is very much close to AIPAC on many of the issues just because she's hated by the Trumpists. So I think that's a huge mistake of AIPAC. And after also supporting the fight against Obama on the Iran deal, which was another big disaster for AIPAC, I think they're getting weaker. They did create another organization that is AIPAC in disguise called the Democratic Majority for Israel, headed by Mark Mellman. But I do believe that eventually their influence is getting weaker and our influence is getting stronger, both because of what we do and also the changes in the American society, that and even in the Jewish community. You know, the old generation, their inspiration about Israel was, you know, the Holocaust and the miracle of the creation for Israel. But the young Jews now are, you know, they want to see Israel representing their values, and the occupation is definitely not where they want to see the country that pretend to be the homeland of the Jewish people. So I do believe that the changes are good for us. I hope that Biden will eventually lead those efforts, but I'm not sure. And, you know, nobody really knows what's going to change. And we all remember how American presidents all of a sudden, you know, changed course because something happened in the world. Now we have Ukraine, and you see now Biden all of a sudden leading the free world after he was almost didn't have an agenda. So we can't really know what the future holds, but we have to keep on working and pushing and do our part in order to eventually achieve what we're trying to achieve.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. And Nadav, just a quick question before we move to Joseph. Do you support only Democrats, or do you also support some Republicans? J Street, I mean.
Well, the reality is right now we're not endorsing any Republicans, but it's not because we are partisan. It's because the days when you had Republicans who were two-staters are over because of Trump. I mean, in the old days, I mean, Jim Baker spoke in a J Street conference, Condoleezza Rice spoke. You know, we had other kind of Republicans, but unfortunately the Republican Party, what happened to the Republican Party is very much what happened to the Likud Party in Israel, where revisionists like Dan Meridor or Tzipi Livni or even Rivlin or Ormert don't feel at home there anymore. So J Street would love to be bipartisan. The problem is that there is no Republicans who are there supporting the two-state solution, and it's the populist Trumpists and the evangelical Christians who completely took hold of the Republican Party. and that's why we don't endorse any Republicans.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Joseph, please.
The United Nations voted for a two-state solution in 1947. That's
Joseph, maybe you would like to introduce your organization before you start.
sure.
You would know from what perspective you come from.
My name is Joseph Avasar. I am the president of a local organization called the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We believe in the creation of one government for the people of Israel and Palestine, for the area of Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem, 14 million people. I personally believe that the Israeli government and the Palestinian governments are the problems. They are not the solution. That they are obstacles to peace. They have proven themselves to be obstacles to peace. Zionism has failed. I was myself, sometimes by default, I believed in Zionism, but Zionism failed. The Israeli government failed to make peace. The Palestinian government failed to make peace. That's just fact. Not only that, they failed to give security to the people of Israel and Palestine. There have been many, many, many wars since 1947. There have been many attempts to create two-state solution. I personally see the two-state solution as a fraud on the people of Israel and Palestine. It refuses to see reality, and to hear the same thing over and over again, to me, is completely unreasonable. So my question to you is, do you believe it is possible to overcome all these failures since 1947, in which the two-state have been attempted and made things worse and made the Israelis and the Palestinians very unsafe, die in constant wars? Not only that, the future is even less safe for the people of Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, I think I said it over and over again in this conversation that I think it is possible. Unlike you, I do believe that the two-state solution is the answer, even though confederation could be a way to implement it. I don't believe that Israelis and Palestinians can have the same government. I think it is not realistic.
Why? Why are you saying that? Why is it not realistic?
Because I don't think that, you said Zionism failed, but for me,
why is it not realistic for Palestinians and Israelis to sit in the same government together?
No, it is possible, and we have an Arab party as part of our coalition for the first time, which is a great move forward. But I believe that eventually the reason why Jews came back to our ancient homeland is to have self-determination for the Jewish people. And the same for the Palestinians.
So are you saying that
Mr. Avasar, you asking me a question, please let me answer.
But you're saying racist things that do not make sense. And since this is the subject, are you saying that it's inconsistent with the idea of having Israelis and Palestinians together in the same government, that it's inconsistent with the Jewish aspiration to have self-determination?
Yeah, I think that the world is still very much, nationality is still very much a phenomenon in the world. And people would like to have nation states. It's true for Europe, for Africa, for almost the entire world. I think the United States is a little different because it's a country of immigrants. But people want to have a nation state, and I believe that it's not exclusive. I mean, for me, Zionism is not exclusive. I think the only way to really implement Zionism is by also that the Palestinian national movement will have their own state. I don't see the scenario that you describe as realistic, but we can agree not to agree. Whether it's racist or not, I don't think that I'm a racist, but I do think that nationality is a liberal movement. It's not a racist movement. And the fact that people want to be, and I think that, even the welfare state is very much consistent with the nation state. So, I don't see your scenario as realistic as well, just like you don't see my scenario as realistic, but that's fine. We will remain in disagreement.
Yeah, the problem is that
Joseph,
your scenario has been proven.
Sorry, Joseph, we have to continue with other people also to give them a chance to ask questions. Gidon, you're next, please.
Thank you. I, as usual, have a very different perspective. So I'm going to start with with my question, and I'll go on here explaining a few things why I am like this. First of all, I have not seen any survey that shows that even a scarce majority of Israelis, and in particular Jewish Israelis, are for a two-state solution. That's first. But my real issue is, you see, I think I left kibbutz in 1992. And in 1992, while I was in Jerusalem, I noticed something very important for us today, and I keep on saying it, that the mitnachlim, that correction is colonialists, we're demanding to change their name from mitnachlim, colonialists, to mityashvim, settlers. That was changing the narrative, and that's why I always insist on keeping the old narrative. I am a mu'uvat, what is that? Maybe twisted, because I do live in Jerusalem, the most right-wing thing, and I meet, and many of the people that I make money off are the most radical people in, excuse the expression, Hebron. And but lots of their others, they're my financial background very often. And there's no talking to them. There's no talking. We have to change the narrative. That's where I think we have to put our focus. And I think one of the greatest things that happen in this country is Rosa Media, but we have to find more funds for them because, I see people here who are less radical than them and they don't know what it is. I'm their introduction to it. We have to work there. We have to change the narrative of the Israelis, perhaps also the Palestinians, but that's their problem. My problem is the Israeli narrative. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, if you didn't see those polls, I would send you to some places where you will see them. I'm looking at polls all the time, and I see plurality for a two-state solution. But you could go into the Geneva Initiative website. You could go to the Democratic, what's the name, Machon Israeli Ledemokratia, and you'll see those polls. In terms of what's colonialism or not, listen, I actually believe, even though I think that the settlers were a great mistake, I think that it's very different than what history called colonialism, because when Spanish people went to South America or French and British to Africa, it was indeed colonialism, but the settlers have a real connection to that land. This is one of the tragedies here, that we have two people with a very strong connection to the same land. This is the Greek tragedy, but you can't ignore this connection, and it's not helpful. And so the idea is not to change each other's narrative, but to learn to live with different narratives and to accept the fact that people have different narratives. And So for me, I don't expect people to give up their connection, the Jews to keep up their connection to Shiloh and Beit El, just like I don't accept Palestinians to give up their connection to Haifa and Jaffa. I'm only asking them to understand that eventually the sovereignty will not represent that connection. And I hope that we will have a peaceful connection between the two states, that people could go freely and visit. But for me, people are more important than the land. And even though I recognize the fact that actually Jews are much more connected to the West Bank and Palestinians are much more connected to the shore of Israel where they came from, it kind of history changed that. And right now we have to live with it, and we have to create a situation where we both could live in peace and dignity, and also end this predicament where we have to make their life miserable in order to protect our life. And the only way that I see for that is the two-state solution. Whether in a confederation or not, I'm not sure. As I told you, I heard Yossi Beilin and Hiba Husseini just recently. I heard other people. There are a lot of good arguments for the confederation, but as just like Ziad said, first of all, let's have two states, and then confederation might be one of the ways to implement it.
Well, I think first we have to have a a big majority, not a plurality, of Jewish Israelis agreeing that Palestinians are humans. Because I have close interactions with those people, and they don't think they're human, right? Yeah, or they think that Jews are human, are superhumans or something. Yeah. Those, if we don't change that narrative,
I believe that empirical data has to be checked by statistical evidence and not by the people that you meet. But that's fine. I mean, we don't have to agree on that.
That's okay. Thank you for your answer, and thanks for the question, Gidon. Ayman, you're next.
Ayman, you're muted.
You need to unmute yourself on the left side, bottom left side.
No, you still are muted. I'm almost convinced just by seeing your face expressions, but still I would love to hear you.
So while waiting for Ayman, I want to go to Rani. Rani, you're next.
So, hello, good evening. So this is Rani from Hebron, and thank you, Nadav, for this presentation. I came from the generation of the two intifadas, as well as also the Oslo Agreement and the post-Oslo Agreement. I just wanted to highlight that that the facts on the grounds that we live on daily basis are just very different comparing to the reality of the presentation that you gave, because here in the West Bank, I think you understand the situation, but you probably don't really live the reality. We are like two nations living in the same place, facing the same threats, the same problems as well on daily basis, like either on the main roads, the fear that we live, the challengings, the future, etc., the economy, the work, the restriction of movement, as well as also the use of force, in addition also to the destruction of properties that is practiced by, the state of Israel on daily basis almost in the entire West Bank in general. So, the scenarios that you're just presenting, either two states or one state, on my eyes are, I'm sorry to say it, but it's not really realistic. I'm not sure if the Palestinians will, or the majority of Palestinians will be really convinced about the two proposals, either two states or one state. If we compare or talks about the two-state solution, I think this will not satisfy the Palestinians, and it will not also satisfy the Israelis society first. Because I don't know how can you connect or disconnect even the Jewishhood connection to the Judea and Samaria, between brackets the West Bank, as well as also how can also you connect or disconnects the links to Palestinians who have also like origins and freedom of also worship, like either in Al-Aqsa Mosque, for example, or in the churches. So separation, you are calling for more separation. We are already separated under the Israeli occupation, but at the same time, the two-state solution is really protecting a great and big separation. This is from one hand. From another hand, also, I wonder if Israel might allow a third or possible regime to be in the, let's say, in the heart of Israel. So from one side, I think Israel since 2006 are complaining and talking a lot about the threats of the Gaza and Hamas as well, like because they left Israel and they would withdraw from Israel. So this was a big mistake for a lot of Israelis. But at the same time, how can you allow another Palestinian regime in the heart or in the West Bank? So I think this scenario is not realistic. And I agree also with Joseph, the way that he expressed himself. And we as a new generation, I think we should think about the uniting as well as also connecting, the culture, bringing as well more cultures, build bridges as well between the Israeli society as well as also with the Palestinian society. I think instead of putting more separation, you as politicians should think also about creating more uniting, the two peoples, either in one state or in a confederation state, wherever, but not into more walls. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rani. No, I'm very much for creating bridges and not separating people. I just do believe that before we have a good marriage, we need a good divorce. And before France and Germany became part of the EU and were able to really erase some of the sovereignty and give it to Brussels, they first had to finish the situation, the war, the occupation, and this is what we need to do first. I do hope that eventually we will become, connected to each other and learn to live together. But I think that first of all, we have to end the occupation, and the only way I could see that we can end the occupation is by having a Palestinian state. But I completely understand that we might remain in disagreement about that.
I think, Nadav, the disagreement was only because you mentioned the belonging, the historic belonging for the Jews for the land, and not mention the Palestinian belonging. But I agree with you that we need a good divorce before we have a good marriage, and give the Palestinian also the opportunity to have their sovereignty and work together slowly to make this marriage to be successful. I am also with the Confederation, but based on two-state solution, and then we can make, the agreement to confederal state. Thank you.
Thank you, well done. Maybe I got muted while I was talking, but I believe that I said that we have, that the two people have a strong connection to the land. I'm not negating at all the Palestinian connection to the land. I think those who say that either Jews or Palestinians don't have connection are just a propaganda instrument, and it's clear that both of us have connections, and the argument who was here before and all of that is not relevant, and we have to find a solution and look forward and not backwards.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. Hazem, you're next.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Nadav. I think I agree totally with what you have said. Although when I thought some time ago that the two-state solution is not relevant anymore because of the hopelessness that we were in the past decade, and I'm happy that J Street, and I'm reading all the newsletters that you are sending me and distributing around the world. I read everything that you distribute. It's a great work that you are doing, and I think I support everything that you are doing. I like the point that you mentioned that we need a democracy in Palestine, because our people today, they are very much looking for freedom and democracy, and not freedom and dictatorship like the other dictatorships in the Arab world. Our people have been suffering for decades, and I don't think they would like to see a dictator signing with Israel and then solidifying this dictatorship by agreement, or implementing this dictatorship with the support of Israel and the world. That's why I liked your point that the world, the US, the world, Israel, should not forget that this issue should be supported, the issue of establishing a democracy. Of course, we would not love Hamas to rule, but what brought Hamas to power in Gaza and to an increasing popularity in the West Bank 15 years ago was the corruption of some Fatah leaders. And this should be, we as Palestinians, we should clean our home. It's our duty, of course, it's not the world's duty, but maybe the world can support that and not neglect it. So I like that you raised this issue, and it's a very important issue. The second point is the settlers increasing violence, and I'm witnessing every day and listening to my friends in the West Bank who move from one city to the other, how the fear that they are talking about, and how this increasing power with, of course, not only violence, but with the criminal attitude, racism, apartheid, all that comes with the settler violence in the West Bank. If it will be increasing more and more, then we will be getting into another stage that might be irreversible. That's why I refer to what you said, and I've said this in the US in one of my trips, that we have to work for a pro-peace, not only pro-Palestinians or pro-Israelis, but pro-peace, meaning pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli, because the majority of both peoples want to live peacefully, freedom, insecurity, and prosperity. And this is basic. This is not something that is too much for somebody to live in this region or anywhere in the world, to live as a human with dignity and freedom in a democracy. So I think I would like, I met myself and I think one or two delegations from J Street who visited Jerusalem as a Jerusalemite. I remember this a few years ago. And I would like to ask you, how can we help you? Now we always ask how others can help us Palestinians. We know our duty is to stand for extremism in Palestine and for violence, and also to stand and support the end of occupation. But how can we help as Palestinians who are supporting peace and prosperity in our region? What do you think we can do to support your efforts?
Yeah, I think that it is critical that moderates will help each other. I think one of the reasons why Hamas became politically strong is because we never showed the moderate Palestinians that diplomacy and moderation works. We only benefited the extremists. Whenever we gave something, we gave it to Hamas, whether it's prisoners or money through Qatar. And the only way to bring Hamas back to its proportion in the population, which I believe is not more than 25%, is by making sure that that those who support diplomacy and moderation could show that they're getting something for their moderate approach. And I believe in many ways, Israel helped to make Hamas so much stronger. And we all know that before the last elections who were kind of postponed, the polls showed that Hamas was not going to win. I mean, there were a lot of, there were 3 big parties as part of Fatah with Barghouti, with Dakhlan, and 36 parties altogether. But it wasn't that Hamas was leading. Hamas was not popular, just like the PA was not popular. What made Hamas popular is the fact that there were no elections, and eventually all the evictions in Sheikh Jarrah and the police behavior in the Haram al-Sharif and all those things that eventually led Hamas to kind of say, we are the supporters of Jerusalem and the Palestinian people. So I believe that it is part of the fact that Hamas became stronger is the mistake of Israel and the US and other players. And that to answer your question, the best way is for moderates, for people who believe in peace, to help each other by you helping the peace side in Israel to show that we have partners on the other side, and by us to show you that you have a partner on our side. And I believe that the majority of American Jews are very much, one of the interesting things about American Jews is that they remember that they are a minority, and that's why they still believe that we have to treat minorities in a decent way. And some Israeli Jews forgot that we were minority all of history and became, they used their majority power in a way that is against the values So we are your partners in J Street and also in the Israeli Peace Camp, and we should always try to empower each other and to show the extremists that we have the answers and they don't.
Yes, I agree.
Hamza, you're next.
Hi, Nadav. Hi, everybody. First of all, I believe that two-state solution is the only attainable one. Do you hear me, everybody?
Looks like the internet connection in Ramallah is not as great.
I think so. It's in my house, not Ramallah. Okay. Do you hear me right now?
Yes.
Please. Hi, Nadav. Hi, everybody. First of all, in my opinion, I believe that the two-state solution is the only attainable one. I have 2 points here to highlight. The first one about the American role. It's extremely important. There is no doubt about it. Meanwhile, we will never be a priority again to any American administration. In fact, we have only one time we were the priority during Bush the father administration, and that was part of the post Cold War arrangements in the whole world. So the main issue for me, I believe that the problem is here, which is that peace groups on both sides live in the margins of both of the two societies. Yes. So I believe that we should find tools not to communicate only dozens of people and exchange our ideas. I truly believe that we need to reach the mass, the public opinion, to hear our voice and give our message to hundreds of thousands of people and millions of people here. by time we can make change. But to remain such like this focus on small groups, we will not make a lot, especially that peace process has no momentum for almost 2 decades. And for the majority of public opinion on both sides, it's a hopeless case, unfortunately. That's it. Thank you.
Nadav, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you, Hamza. You know, it's true that the first Bush administration, which was one of the most brilliant administrations in terms of foreign policy, not only here, but also in other places. And it was really, you know, they used the kind of end of the Cold War and also the results of the first Gulf War to bring the, you know, to get the Madrid conference. So I share your, you know, what you said about them, but I believe that there were other administrations who made an attempt, but the attempts were not effective. And one of the reasons that they didn't have a political support for a bold move within the US, and this is what J Street is trying to change. So I hope that the next time the American administration is working on it, they will get the support in Congress, and we are doing our best to reach that conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Arnaud?
Hi, hello everybody. So several of you know me. I'm Arnaud, husband of Sophie, who asked the first question. We live in Boston, so where you were, and we are a supporter of J Street. So I think also it's a miracle that there is something, an alternative to APAC, and very supportive to making, you know, bold progress toward just peace. The question I have is, when do we start to draw a line? There are several organizations, like very well recognized organizations. Recently, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, that made long and documented investigation that now are accusing Israel of committing the crime of apartheid in Palestine. And it's not, you know, just a small accusation, like leftist accusation in the air. You know, they, again, very documented in the West Bank, that there are different rights, whether you're a Jew or not. We hear a lot of the same arguments from Israeli government and right wing, which is there's no partner for peace. Like if now there's a partner for peace in the Israeli government, you know, there's mostly there. I believe there's no partner for peace. So my question is, like, there's no partner for peace? Is it an excuse to apartheid? How long, you know, we're gonna be asked as American Jew to tolerate this and to still give unconditional support? So I like to hear all the solution, and I'm grateful that we have the light and not yet the tunnel. But it feels like the Israeli government feels no pressure to change, because in the US, you even have laws that condemn you if you dare boycott even the illegal settlements in occupied territory. Like you see, like Ben & Jerry's is being divested from. Like, we cannot even speak against something illegal in front of international law. So I think it's great to have a vision for the final solution, but when do we start to make Israel feel pressure? Because we don't stand for that. That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, the position of J Street, which I share, and not only because I work in J Street, is that it's very much against outlawing BDS, even though we don't support BDS. I mean, for example, on my own, I don't buy things from the settlements, and whenever I go to a restaurant, I look at the wine to make sure. But as a policy, we believe that it is only it kind of disconnecting us from many in the Israeli peace camp when we speak about boycotts. On the other hand, we believe that it is completely wrong to outlaw BDS. BDS is a completely legitimate way of a democratic way to exercise a non-violent way, which is supposed to be legitimate, and that's why the rules against BDS is completely not only not just, but it's also counterproductive, because actually BDS is not going to really influence Israel in terms of its economy. And trust me, I can see how many Chinese and Indian come to Israel for our economy. BDS is not going to change that. But what really is going to be problematic for Israel is the distancing of progressive and liberals, not only Jews, but in general. And when you curb free speech, you only push them further away, which is a great mistake. The Ben and Jerry example is a great example, and I know it because I was Consul General to New England. I know Vermont, I know Ben and Jerry's, two Jews who opened one of their first factories in Israel because they believed in Zionism. But for them, Zionism ends at the Green Line, and that's why they didn't want to sell their product in the settlements. And to call them anti-Semites it is really unbelievable to call two Jews who care deeply about Israel anti-Semites. It's just so counterproductive and foolish that I can't even start to describe. So, and in terms of the apartheid designation of some of the organization, I think it is a huge mistake to erase the difference between the two sides of the Green Line, because that goes against the two-state solution rationale. I do believe that Israel has many issues within the Green Line. We're far, far from being a perfect democracy. And the Arab minority should be treated better. But most countries in the world have issues with minorities, and to compare it with what's happening in the West Bank is I think, a mistake. In the West Bank, it is a real brutal military occupation. Within Israel, it's a non-perfect democracy, which we should work harder to improve. And the nationality law, for example, it was a big mistake. So, we have a much more nuanced position both on BDS and on kind of the apartheid, use of the word apartheid, because we feel that, one of my roles is to make sure that J Street is in line with the pro-peace movement in Israel. And there are some things that when you say it, you actually push them away. And I believe that we should very much work together. And this is one of those words. So we have a different view about using that word, and definitely erasing the Green Line when treating the two sides as equal in terms of the way the Palestinians are being treated.
Thank you. Ayman, I hope you will be able to unmute yourself this time.
Good evening, Arif Tov, Salamu Alaikum, Ramadan Kareem. I just want to start by saying, Joseph, I add my voice to your voice. I like what you said, I respect it, and I appreciate it. Mr. Tamir, good evening to you also. I have a question to you, since you are aware of much more in the Israeli politics. I want to ask you, who holds the master key for the peace process in the Middle East? Is it the Israeli government? Is it the PLO? Is it the USA? Or is it the Zionist movement? Because I personally feel that the peace process is not controlled by the Israelis or the Palestinians. Somebody else is really seeing what's his interest to do, because I believe the Jews and the Arabs are victims. Both are victims for the struggle and for this conflict in the Middle East. If anything in the world happens, anything whatsoever, there is always money behind it. Money, you know. This whole thing, who is benefiting from the struggle? Both people are being hurt. Both people are suffering. We know that. But who is the winner? Who is collecting the fortune out of the dispute in the Middle East? I'd like to see, what do you think, or what do you have an answer for me to convince me with that? Thank you very much.
Thank you, and Ramadan Kareem. Yeah, I don't believe in conspiracy theories, I have to say. I think it's the reality is much more simple. There's no kind of weird forces behind it. We have a government that doesn't have the incentives to do something courageous about peace. But eventually, I believe that for peace to happen, the most important player has to be the Israeli government as the strong side in this conflict. I do believe, as I said, that America can influence the Israeli government very much, and especially more during, during when we have a government that want to have constructive relations with the US, unlike we had with the Netanyahu government, even though according to the last news, we might go back to this kind of governments. So I do believe that the international community could influence. I'll give you an example. Yair Lapid, for example. He's a two-stater. He doesn't have a lot of passion for that, but he's a two-stater. He is very much influenced by Europe, for example. He normalized relations with Sweden, even though Sweden recognized the Palestinian state. He did go to Brussels, unlike Netanyahu, who for him, Europe was only Orban and other populist leaders. And Yair Lapid could be influenced by the international community. Unfortunately, the international community is now distracted. But I believe that if there is a new reality in the Middle East that could be leveraged by the American administration, as I mentioned before. For example, yeah, I know the Emirates, they don't care deeply about the Palestinians, but they do care about Jerusalem, they do care about, and they do have populations who care. And I told the Emirates, you have much more influence over the Israeli government than France and Germany. Because Israelis are so enthusiastic about the Abrahamic Accords, but use that influence. And when there is problems in Jerusalem, explain to Israel, to the Israeli government, what does it mean for your people when they see things in Al-Aqsa and in the, in Haram al-Sharif, and eviction in Sheikh Jarrah, and that you could hate Hamas and still feel that this is wrong. So I do believe that, eventually the Israeli government is the most important player here, but it could be pushed by the international community, and especially by the US.
Thank you. Next is Avi.
Hi, Nadav. Hi, everybody. It's not that I have a question, but I really want to thank you, because I think today you gave us a lot of power and power injections for the two-state solution. I'm a true believer of the two-state solution. I think all the other solutions are a little bit imaginary, or as you said, can be later, or as if also as Ziad said earlier, first of all, let's make the two-state solution, and then we see, and then maybe another generation, our sons and our grandsons, after they live in peace, they can decide something else. And you're a great analyst and explanations are really, for me, it's a wonderful power injection, as I said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Avi. I really appreciate the feedback.
Cynthia?
Good evening. Nadav, I was very impressed by your journey. You led us through your life and how peace is really, you said you're really passionate about it. And I think that resonates with me, but everyone in the group. I want to ask you something concerning what happens now in the world, and that Israel-Palestine conflict is not really a top priority. And you mentioned that aspect of collective trauma on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side. And I wonder if something could unite everyone around that. Collective trauma is also in Europe, it's also in America, that there is like a big conference on that for the politicians, that also there's schooling about it, workshops, that from there something could grow, because the whole world needs to change because of climate change, and what happens now with Russia and Ukraine is also very much trauma driven. I'm just throwing it into the group and wondering what you think about it, whether at all in J Street that ever comes up.
Yes, you mentioned the crisis of climate change, the crisis in Ukraine, and I once heard a very smart American, I think it was Rami Manuel, who said, "Don't ever let a crisis get wasted, and try to turn every crisis into an opportunity." And this is what optimist people like me are always trying to do. So climate change, for example, is a reminder that we all live in the same universe and that we have to do things together. There is a great organization called ippeace that is trying to do that exactly between Jordan, Palestine, and Israel, and to work on water resources and sewage and alternative energy solutions that will help bring the peace, because eventually, those climate change challenge doesn't know borders. The same with Ukraine. One of the good things, and I think this is one of the reasons why we saw Secretary Blinken in the region, is that all of a sudden, because of the Ukraine-Russia crisis, the countries in the Middle East with the energy resources became important again after the United States kind of said, "Oh, we don't need you. We are completely independent in terms of energy." And all of a sudden, if the Biden administration thought that they could forget about the Middle East, they do need those countries, and those countries need the US. So I believe that this might connect the American administration to the Middle East again. And one of the things that America could really do is orchestrate all those new regional architecture into really helping solve the Palestinian issue, which is very different than what Trump and Netanyahu tried to do, which was to bypass the Palestinian issue. But I actually think it is an opportunity. I believe that Secretary Blinken and Biden would like to see that, but for some reason they kind of, as I said, deprioritize it, and maybe the fact that now the Middle East is relevant again will give them another push to try to deal with this region in a smarter way. The Iran situation is also another push for America, because one of the ways to deal with the Iranian threat is to make sure that there is collaboration between all those countries that have anxieties about Iran. And maybe that will be another leverage for America to help solve the Palestinian issue. And if Trump used this anti-Iran thing in order to ignore the Palestinians, I think the Biden administration could do the opposite. So my point is that in every crisis, there is an opportunity, and we have to try to turn every lemon into a lemonade.
Definitely, yes.
Thank you, Nadav.
Inshallah.
We are getting closer to the end of the session. I wanted, before we thank you, I wanted to ask you one thing that came. I mean, I totally agree with like 100%, 99% of what you said. One thing I was kind of curious is regarding the election in the Palestinian Authority. You mentioned that you don't think that Hamas would have been elected, but you know, I believe that if that was the case and if that was the indication, then probably the PA would go on with the elections, and probably the reason they didn't continue was that they felt that they might lose the election. So my question to you is, you know, what can we learn from the past elections where Hamas was brought up, or what can we learn from the Egypt election when the Muslim Brotherhood was elected? Do we believe that the election is better than any result that could come up? I mean, would you support an election where you know that Hamas is going to win, for example?
First of all, I think the reason why Abbas decided not to do the elections, of course, he used Jerusalem and Israel as a pretext, but he didn't want the elections, and not because of Hamas, because he would have lost in Fatah. He would have lost to the Dakhlan and Barghouti, so he would have been even not the winner in his own camp, because the polls showed pretty, you know, clearly that Hamas was less than 30%. But Fatah was divided. But if
any one of the Fatah candidate had more than 30%?
Well, if you add the Barghouti list, the Dakhlan list, and the PA list, it will be winning for sure. But actually, the truth is that both Hamas and the PA are not very popular, because both of them are dictatorial. And so, for me, first of all, for me, democracy is always better, even if we don't like the results, because when the Palestinians doesn't have a legitimate leadership, it is always an excuse not to do something with them. And even when Morsi was elected in Egypt, he still kept the peace with Israel. And we today have a Muslim Brotherhood party in Israeli coalition. And we see that not all Muslim Brotherhood are, you know, just want to destroy Israel. And Hamas can change too. But we have to, so I think that the best move is that the international community will give political horizon and push for election at the same time, because with political horizon, Hamas will always become weaker. Without political horizon, Hamas will become stronger, because when there is a chance for diplomacy, then Hamas have nothing to show for. But when there's no chance for diplomacy, then people just prefer terrorism and extremism. So I do believe that it was a mistake by the international community to not push for elections. I think, for example, if the Israeli government couldn't give Abbas the ability to vote in the post offices in Jerusalem, he could have done it in the European consulates or in the UN headquarters, or even virtually. There was a solution. But he didn't want the elections because he was afraid that he's going to be embarrassed by his own people in Fatah, much more than Hamas. Hamas became stronger because of the postponement of the elections, not because of the elections. This is my analysis. But even if I were wrong, I would prefer to deal with a leadership that has legitimacy, even if that leadership is not my cup of tea, than to deal with someone that doesn't have legitimacy of its people.
Thank you. Makes sense. Much appreciated. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate the way, I think the way you described the situation and the way you analyze it, is just amazing. I don't think that we had such analysis here in this group, and we did have a lot of people here, by the way. So really, thank you for that. I hope that our group can collaborate with J Street. I think we have a lot of in common. I wish more people from J Street heard about us and maybe joined us. We have 4,000 people on Facebook, 2,000 people on Clubhouse. We meet by Zoom every week, by Clubhouse every week, almost. And we have a very, very active Facebook group in which we exchange, and it's an opportunity not just to talk between Jews, but to talk with Palestinians, as you see. And I think it's very important for Jews to listen to Palestinians. So again, if you could help us get exposure with J Street, that would be wonderful.
I want to add also, please join us in writing million letters to push the peace process. I put the form in the chat. You can apply and join the group.
Sure, Maury will send me the information because I'm not in a position to write it down right now. And I will try to connect between you and J Street, and also to send our information to you and for you to kind of retweet and pass it on. We need more, public in the region to know more about us as well. So thank you very much for this opportunity and to meet so many people who are passionate about peace, just like me. It always warmed my heart to meet this kind of people. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Nadav.
Thank you. Toda rabba.
Thank you, Nadav.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.
Bye. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Thank you for
Good
joining.
night. Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
By the way, next week we will talk about activism and mostly about Warda's initiative, million peace letters. So we would love to have everybody here. This is something that people can participate wherever they live, and without investing a lot of money, not investing any money, and actually can make an impact. So looking forward to seeing you next week, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Maury. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Looking forward to see you next week.
Ramadan Kareem.
Ramadan Mubarak. Yeah, for the Muslims.